Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of My JavaScript Story. We have a few episodes that our current guest has been on. I'm happy to report that we have Misko Hevery here to talk to us and tell his story. Misko, do you want to say hi?
Thanks for having me. Hi, this is Misko, and thanks for having me over here.
So I heard you wrote some little framework. Do you want to talk to, just tell us briefly who you are and what you do?
Yes, so I'm a software engineer at Google. And while at Google, I had this itch that building web apps was kind of difficult. And so I started a project which eventually morphed into AngularJS. And AngularJS became kind of popular beyond what I was expecting, or beyond my own dreams, as they say. And then we have kind of grew the community well, and at some point we realized, AngularJS, as awesome as it is, it had few drawbacks that we didn't know how to fix iteratively, and so then we had redone it in the form of Angular. We dropped the JS. So that's my quick version of my story.
Awesome. And I did mention that you've been on a number of episodes. Obviously, we have an Angular podcast, so we have you on periodically there, or other members of the core team. But for people who are interested, the first episode that we've had you on any of our shows was JavaScript Jabber, and that was episode 32. And you and Igor came on and talked to us about AngularJS. That was in 2012. And then episode 1, you told us the whole story about how you created Angular. We're probably not going to have time to go into that in depth today. So I'm just going to throw that out. If people want to hear that story, that is episode 1 of Adventures in Angular. This episode is sponsored by Sentry.io. Recently, I came across a great tool for tracking and monitoring problems in my apps. Then I asked them if they wanted to sponsor the show and allow me to share my experience with you. Sentry provides a terrific interface for keeping track of what's going on with my app. It also tracks releases so I can tell if what I deployed makes things better or worse. They give full stack traces and as much information as possible about the situation when the error occurred to help you track down the errors. Plus, one thing I love, you can customize the context provided by Sentry. So, if you're looking for specific information about the request, you can provide it. It automatically scrubs passwords and secure information, and you can customize the scrubbing as well. Finally, it has a user feedback system built in that you can use to get information from your users. Oh, and I also love that they support open source to the point where they actually open source Sentry if you want to self-host it. Use the code devchat at Sentry.io to get 2 months free on Sentry's small plan. That's code devchat at Sentry.io. But yeah, you also came on JavaScript Jabber and talked about dependency injection with Voita. And then, yeah, you've been on a number of Adventures in Angular episodes, as we said, just talking about like it was mostly around the time of the beta for Angular and just talking about how things were going there. So people wanted updates, and we have brought you guys in and had you do your thing. So anyway, this show, we kind of focus a little bit more on the developer journey, and I think this is going to be interesting just to see where you come from. It was interesting. I was just talking to Jamin Ferguson for my JavaScript story, and I just mentioned, I was like, yeah, well, I've got Misko coming up next, and he's like, whoa, a heavy hitter, huh? And I'm like, yeah, he's done a lot of terrific stuff, but when I talk to Misko at like NGConf and stuff, Misko's just a dude, and so I'm kind of curious to see what kind of balance we strike, I guess, between just a dude and I've done all of these awesome things. So we'll see how that goes, because people elevate open source authors, especially in popular projects, to a certain degree, and then they think that there's no way that they could ever do something like that. And a lot of times it's just a dude that wrote just a thing that turned out to be kind of an important just a thing.
Totally agree.
So anyway, let's start with the very beginning. How did you get into programming?
Wow, that goes really, really long time back. I think I was in the 4th grade, early 80s. My dad read somewhere in an article that there are these things called computers. Now, mind you, back then I lived in what used to be called Czechoslovakia, and so computers were not as available as they were in the Western societies. And so somewhere in the magazine, my dad was like, oh, there's these computers, you could get them. And so I think my dad had to bribe a pilot that flew international to be like, oh, like, here's some money and here is, something. Would you, while you're international, would you pick one of these things up for us and bring it home? And so, yeah, we got this thing and then we didn't know what to do with it. And so I remember that I learned, we kind of learned with my dad together to program, going back and forth. What I found interesting at that point on that particular computer was a Sinclair ZX Spectrum.
Okay.
For those of you who want to Google that or had it, is that it didn't have, it had individual normal keyboard, like QWERTY keyboard, like everybody else, right? But when you programmed it, you didn't program it by typing a command. Instead, every single command was already on the key somewhere, and you just wanted to type let. So then you had to be like function shift and LQ or something, and then a let.
Oh, wow.
And these things were not actually editable, so it's not like you could go back and change let to something else. Like these were just individual tokens that you would add into the basic programming language, and it was basic, right? And so that's what we started, and you start with something silly like, oh, can I print my name 10 times? Can I make I remember one thing that I spent the whole weekend on was just, how do I draw what back then was Czechoslovak flag? And the reason why that was tricky is because the flag was in 3 colors, and the Sinclair Spectrum at that point, in order to save on memory, they only allowed 2 colors per subsection of a screen. And so you have to align the flag in the right way so that, silly stuff like that. But anyways, I'm talking too much.
No,
but that's kind of how it got started. You started as a kid, explore, curious, how things are, and you just kind of go from there.
So being able to program, at least in the time frame that you were doing it, was a pretty rare thing then.
It was a pretty rare thing. People didn't really understand what it meant. I remember I went to school and I was like, oh, they got a computer. So, a few years later, the school I was attending, they actually got a computer from the government saying you should do something with this thing, right? And I was like, oh, yeah, computers. Yeah, I know exactly how to program in BASIC. I got that. And so everybody was like, what? BASIC? How is that possible? But, it just comes down to a toy. You have a toy at home. You played with it for a few years. Well, of course, you know how to do it in another computer that has the same kind of a mental model.
Yeah.
So really my advantage, if there was an advantage, was really just comes down to the fact that my dad, for whatever reason, decided to purchase this thing that was not even a mainstream at that point. We're talking early 80s, right? Right. We're talking about a toy that we purchased and continually have interest into well, how does this thing work and why does it do these things, and play with it. And the nice thing back then was that you could actually understand the whole thing. Right. Kind of, right? You could kind of understand. Today, yeah. I hit a key. Well, let's see. There is a Bluetooth connection between the keyboard and the computer.
I know, right?
Which, by the way, is encrypted, right? So that nobody can eavesdrop. And oh my God, just a simple stuff like key presses get complicated. Yep.
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, and even the software systems that we build today, right? The epitome of programmer in the 80s was essentially the guy that would go into the basement and he would hammer on a bunch of code, and then he would come out and you would have Dentrix or some system, right? I met the guy that wrote Dentrix, which is a dental office management system, the original version, and it was just him. There were 3 guys in the company, and the other 2 were business guys. And today, if you wanted to build a complicated system like that, and have it useful and work in the ways that you wanted it to, good luck with you could have one guy start it, but eventually you're going to need a whole team of people because it just gets so complicated.
That's true, but also there is a little higher expectations of what a software is today, right?
Yeah, fair enough.
Back then, it was, you were happy if you typed the patient's name and it got retrieved, and you were like, oh,
Yeah.
right. Today we expect type ahead and
Yeah,
hovering over things and
that's
fast
true.
responses, and the data sets are more ridiculous, and it has to be available on my phone. And
Yep,
so it is a more complicated thing that we're solving, even though
that's true.
you might be tempted to say, like, well, it's the same thing. Well, it's not.
Yeah. Well, and we've got more powerful tools to solve a lot of those things too.
Yeah.
So I'm curious. So you get this machine and you do basic on it for a number of years. I mean, did you at that point know that you wanted to do computers for the rest of your life, or were you going to be something else, or how did that kind of come about? Where you went, okay, I'm going to be a professional at this.
We're talking like, I think 9 or 10-year-olds, kind of a kid, right? I had a lot of interest. I'm not sure what professionals meant at that age.
Right.
What happened next is that a few years later, when I was, I think, around 13 or so, we moved to the US.
Okay.
And so that was a kind of a big change. And, once we got to the US, it was more, we got into high school. High school would make available AP programming kind of a style things. So I was part of that. And at that point, I was kind of like, yes, I think I want to do this. Like, this is just so much fun. Like, why wouldn't I just play for the rest of my life? If people want to pay me for it, that's even better.
Yep. Makes sense. So did you go to college then? Do you have a CS degree or?
Yeah, I went to college. I actually went to college in Rochester, New York, to RIT. I have a BS/MS in computer engineering. So I graduated from there and kind of went. The funny story there was that when you, I don't know if you remember the days when you had to apply for colleges and you were all stressed out about it, right? I applied for Carnegie Mellon and I didn't know the difference in computer science and computer engineering at that point.
Right.
It turns out computer engineering is more hardware and computer science is just purely software.
Yeah, my degree's in computer engineering.
So. Yeah, okay, well, thank you. Welcome, buddy. So I applied actually to Carnegie Mellon because that was kind of the well-respected. And I got back a letter saying like, well, for CS, we don't have space for you, but we'll take you for CE, for computer engineering.
Okay.
And I actually didn't know the difference. And I was like, well, I want to do software. So I turned them down and instead I went to RIT, except like 2 weeks into RIT, somebody finally explained the difference to me. Like, one is just software, the other one is software and hardware. And I was like, well, I want to do the hardware part too.
Right.
So I actually ended up doing computer engineering, which I could have gone to Carnegie for, but that's okay. I went to RIT, loved the place, had a lot of fun. And one thing that I really, really liked about RIT is that they made internships mandatory.
Oh, nice.
So it was not an option. It was like you had to, in order to graduate, you had to go and have internships at a bunch of companies. And at the time, that was so stressful, like, oh, I'm going getting a job. And, but now in retrospect, that was such an awesome idea and it made such a huge difference. I remember when it was time to get a first real job, it was so much easier having a whole bunch of internships and be like, well, I've done all these things versus some other candidate.
Yeah.
I'm green from theoretical knowledge. And
yeah, I agree. What was the internship that taught you the most?
Let's see. So I interned at Xerox. There I worked on some image processing algorithm. Basically, they had printers, right? The printers and copiers, and they wanted to check the quality, and so they would print like thousands of blank pages, and they would scan the blank pages, and they would say like, go find all the little specks on these blank pages and see if the specks move. So, basically software can scan it all and see how this, because the idea was that, if the speck was moving, then it's just a dirt, but if it stays stationary and it's growing in size, then it's probably some kind of damage to it. But I just found it hilarious that the printer was just printing blank pages like day in and day out, and they would take like every 10,000th page out and be like scanning that page and see.
Wow.
Then I also worked for Intel. Intel I'd liked because I worked on a chipset which supports the main CPU. And that was kind of cool because I kind of really got into the hardware of things and really understood how kind of the processes work and how the stuff comes together. So I enjoyed that. So those are kind of the big internships. Then I worked for a little consulting firm in Rochester because it was just convenient, called Questra, which eventually morphed into some other company. I can't quite remember. And that was a lot of fun because I got to do embedded stuff. Basically bringing software and hardware together into software that runs your printer, kind of a thing. It's still software, but it's kind of embedded.
Some of that stuff is really tricky to do.
It is. And I think this is the kind of difference between software engineers today versus back in the day, is because back in the day you were living in such a constrained world, right? Like my first computer had 64 kilobyte total, right? And 60 kilobytes of it was read-only memory. So you only had, like, 48K left? And that 48K had to be split between video memory, right, and your operating system and then the application that you actually ran. It's like, and so when you design stuff, like, you really had to think about this thing. And when you went to the embedded world, like printer, like, it's the same kind of a thing. You really think about every single byte, how it's used, how it's laid out, what's where, versus, the software engineers that kind of show up today and that have never have any hardware background. They will throw an expression on the screen, not realizing what is actually happening underneath and what are the costs to these expressions.
Well, it's funny too with embedded. I remember taking in my embedded systems class, and we had to build a couple of applications and run them on real hardware. And it was always funny because, the program just dies.
Yes.
Right.
Most factory says no.
it just dies. And so, so then what you do is you take it back to the emulator and you run it in the emulator.
Which doesn't reproduce.
Right. It either doesn't reproduce or you're checking what's in the registers to see,
Yeah.
And so then you get through it and you're like, okay, well, I'm getting a different result on the emulator. So then you have to go look up the known bugs for the emulator. I mean, right? It's that kind of thing, but at the same time, it forces you into that level of problem solving that's really, really interesting. So,
yeah, it's definitely a different level.
Yeah.
The way you think about it. And I think it's important for people to kind of actually understand, like, what is actually happening at the low level. And yeah, it's one of those extra things, extra views that you have into a CPU that others don't.
Right. Now, when you started working on the project that eventually became Angular, you were at Google. How did you? What does your journey look like getting to Google?
Oh, how I got to Google? Let's see. So after I graduated the school, I went to work for the Questra, the consulting firm. The stipulation was that I had to move to California because I wanted it. When I interned in California in Folsom with Intel, I just was like, this place is awesome. The weather is nice all the time. Like, I want to live in California. Plus, also, remember, like, I come from Czechoslovakia, right? Where as a kid, like, I get this computer and I'm like, this thing is amazing. Where is it built? Oh, this is all built in Silicon Valley. And I had this dream as a kid. I vividly remember to this day that I had a dream where I was like, when I grow up, I hope I'm just going to have enough money to be able to go and visit Silicon Valley one day.
Nice.
That was my dream.
You live there now, right?
I live here, right? I live here.
Yeah.
I'm part of it. I am the thing that, the part of the cog in the machine.
Yeah.
But I remember having the dreams, like, I just want to be able to go there one day. Like, that's the thing I'm aiming for.
That's awesome.
Anyways, but the question was something else that I got derailed.
Yeah, I was just curious. I mean, your journey from graduation.
Oh, right.
Google.
So I graduated. I went to work for the consulting firm. We moved to California, or rather, I moved to California. I was single back then. And I worked for, first for Questra, then I worked for a little startup that didn't go anywhere. And then I went to work for Adobe. That was a lot of fun, working for Adobe.
What did you do there?
Oh, well, sorry. Yes. So I worked on a technology that was supposed to be a competitor to Flex.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And then Adobe bought Macromedia. So when the Macromedia was purchased, the project I was working on got canceled basically. And
Well,
so,
yeah, because they own Flex.
yeah. So I was grumpy, right? And so as a grumpy person I was like, I'm quitting and I'm going somewhere else. So I went to Google, and that's how I got to Google.
So what's I'm sure the process has changed, but what was the process for you of getting a job at Google?
I had to go through the interview process, and I actually, the first interview I failed. So for all those people who tried to get at Google and failed, like, just try again. It's okay. And but it was kind of funny because the first time I failed, it was very, very beginning of Google, where Google didn't even have a name, or they weren't, like, too bad I failed, right? I was like very, very, very beginning of
right.
Google. I was like dismissed it, like, oh, whatever, like some silly company doesn't want me, I don't care. And then when I reapplied, I think it was like at least 4 years later or something. And then by that point, like, Google was well known, public, and yeah. So it was kind of fun.
So they put you through the interview process, and they hired you to do what exactly? Because I mean, your job now is Angular, and I'm pretty sure that job didn't exist before.
Yeah. So I was just hired as a regular software engineer.
Okay.
The job that I did at the beginning was I worked for what back in the day was called known as Google Checkout, or I think originally it actually might have launched as certified by Google.
Okay.
Way back in the history.
Right.
But basically what the project wanted to do was micropayments.
Mm-hmm.
Eventually the project has morphed into basically Google Wallet. So if you're using Google Wallet today, like, it has its origins in there. I doubt Google Wallet has any code that was shared from the original code base, so I'm pretty sure it's a separate thing. But
yep, I remember Google Checkout. So
yeah. So that was the original project that I did. And while I was at Google Checkout, the thing that kind of resonated with me was, the thing that I was passionate about was the code quality, or rather the lack thereof.
That is a common problem across all software organizations.
Yeah, so I kind of spent a lot of time refactoring the code base, simplifying it, doing tech talks, getting people to kind of understand, like, what are the things that they should care about, and in the process, actually, unbeknownst to me, I started writing frameworks, because, like, well, this code is just ad hoc, like, you should really have some consistent way of doing this, so can we have some framework that goes into it? And so I created a framework for Google Checkout, and it kind of had its origins there, basically.
Hey guys, let me tell you about Clubhouse. I swear, I've used every project management software there is out there, and I hated project management software. Now I have Clubhouse. Overall, it's simple and straightforward to use, but has enough of the integrations and power features you need to get the job done without getting confusing. This means that I can use it, and the non-technical members of my team can figure out what they need from it. It also makes it easy for me to zoom out and see what's going on overall before zooming back in and specifying more work that needs to be done, or picking the next task for me to tackle. They integrate with all the systems that you'd expect and have a REST API for, well, the rest. If you go to https://clubhouse.io/JSstory, you can get 2 months free instead of the standard 14-day trial for any team size. Once again, that's https://clubhouse.io/JSstory.
And after that, I continued my passion for testability, and so I left Checkout and within Google. And there was another group that was forming, which was Test Mercenaries.
Okay.
And Test Mercenaries, the idea was that it's a group that goes into other teams and helps them get good code hygiene. I remember this is like 10 years ago, where people were debating whether testing was a good idea, right? Like,
right.
Today, nobody has a debate like, should we write tests? Like, yeah, of course we should write tests.
Yeah. Yeah, I
but
remember
back
the
then, it was
debate. Yeah, same kind of thing.
Yeah, it was like debated even at Google, like should we write tests? And then people would be like, no, tests are stupid. And
yep.
So the idea of Test Mercenaries was that we were tasked to disseminate the ideas and also to help projects really understand, how to write tests. And so I actually did that. And while I was doing that, I'd actually had a blog post, and I had wrote a lot of blogs on testing and what the good idea of testings are. So some people might actually know me from that previous life.
Right.
And then eventually, I somehow landed on a project. Oh, that's what happened. Then the economic downturn happened, and so the companies were like, well, we should really focus on core projects rather than these high lofty ideas. Plus, at that point, like, people kind of started to understand that testing was a good idea, and so the team kind of got disbanded. And so I went and work on Google Feedback, which to this day you can have apps where they have a little feedback in a corner. You can click on it, and the little thing comes up and says, something's broken about this app. Highlight the area that you think is broken, and then you highlight the area that's broken, and you say, "This is what I don't like," or whatever, right? And you flip it back, and then there's some machine learning on the other side that determines, like, oh, people always not like this thing. You should probably look at this first, kind of a thing, because hundreds of thousands of feedbacks. But my job was to help with the code, and I think it was written in Gwt. Or something of that sort. I can't remember. And I remember, again, I kind of got not forced, but like I naturally gravitated into, like, well, what's the code quality? How do we make this simple and other people's productive? And so while working on this, I also kind of, in my free time, was toying with this idea of having a kind of a new language on top of HTML that would allow people to. The idea originally was to allow somebody who doesn't know how to program something like HTML to be able to write interactive pages. And so I was doing this in Gwt during my day job, and then working on this on kind of on the side. And I was like, this Gwt thing isn't working out for me. And so I went to Brad, and we're like, we should really get rid of this and do this other thing, and managed to somehow convince them. And the rest is the history, as they say. So we brought that in, and slowly it turned into a framework that other people wanted to use, and then we kind of grew it, made it open source, and sent it out to the world.
Very cool. And it's interesting too. I mean, how many people have? I mean, they built their careers on that little project, right?
Yeah, that's crazy to me.
Yep. But at the same time, it just takes like that little germ of an idea, and then you start building on it, iterating on it, and it just kind of turns into something. But yeah. So I think we asked a whole bunch of other questions during the first episode of Adventures in Angular, where we kind of teased out more of the story. So I'm going to refer people there. I'm a little curious how your career has kind of progressed because of Angular. So you start working on this project, starts getting adoption. I mean, what does that do for you? I mean, all of a sudden, are you way more important at Google, or are you're kind of in a leadership role over there? But it seems like Brad kind of steers the ship in a lot of ways, and Igor does sometimes, and you do sometimes. So how is that how did that go from when you invented Angular to now, as far as your career's trajectory?
So for the most part, I was an individual contributor / tech lead. What that means is that I cared about the technical aspects of things, and left the management of people and everything else to somebody else. And one thing I want to point out is that early on, we came across Igor, and we kind of hired him. And I think what Igor brings to the table is he's amazing at getting the external community involved, but also on productizing, I would say. Like, I'm the guy with crazy ideas, and he's the guy who's like, okay, well, cool, crazy idea. How do we make it real, kind of a thing. And so we complement each other rather well. And so I think, it's nice to have ideas, but I don't think you would have a successful framework if you didn't have somebody like Igor to actually do the necessary drudge work to make it successful.
It reminds me a little bit of the way that I have a great aunt and uncle, and they were both sociology professors, and he would come up with these brilliant ideas, just these brilliant ideas. And he would try and explain them to everybody, and people would look at him like, I know you're telling me something that is brilliant, but I cannot make heads or tails of it. And my great aunt was the one who could take all that information, synthesize it, and then look at you and say, it's A, B, C, D. And you'd go, oh! And it sounds like that's kind of the relationship you have there, right?
Yes, to some degree. Like people always ask what's more important, ideas or execution. I think it's execution, and Igor's the execution, right? He's the one who basically knows how to get it out and make sure that all the other pieces that go with it, which is documentation and release notes and having cadence and long-term support with the external world, like all of these secondary things that are super important for companies. That's really all his creation. Anyway, so most of the time I was individual contributor. Lately, the team has grown, and so now I became more of a tech lead / manager, where my role is I've taken on the responsibility of growing people, as they say, and providing feedback to them and making sure that they're productive, which I kind of enjoying. It's nice. I joke around. So the way this came about, let me back up a second. I love telling good stories. What you decide if it's a good story or not. Is that
a good story?
At some point, right, in your life, you're like, well, I should have kids. And then you start having kids, and then once you have your first child, you're like, well, I should read up on how do you program these kids, right?
That's right. Where's the owner's manual?
Yes.
All this other stuff came out.
So this one owner's manual that I came across is a book called How to Talk to Your Kids So They'll Listen, and How to Listen to Your Kids So They'll Talk. It's a big, yellow, thick book, and I love it. It's awesome.
It's a good book.
Have you read it?
Yes.
Okay. So it's very pragmatic. I was like, if X happens, Y. So I'm reading through this book, and I'm going like, well, that's interesting. That's what Brad does to me. And so I had this epiphany, right? That like, wait, like Brad is managing me just like I'm supposed to manage my kids. And at some point you're like, well, wait a minute, I'm catching on to this. I think I could do this too. So we joke, but I don't think it's really that much of a joke, which is that, kids are people too, obviously. But more importantly, that, big kids are still just kids. Yeah. Right. Like I remember as a child, I was like, one day I'll grow up and I'll be an adult. And I'm like, still waiting. Right. Like at no point in your life does anything change where you're like, you check mark, I'm an adult now. Right. Like you just get more responsibilities and going to gradually grow into this role. And yes, like you don't pick your nose anymore, but it's like, there isn't a specific line where you cross and you're like, now I'm an adult.
Yeah, becoming an adult, the only difference between becoming an adult is, let me rephrase it. The only difference between kids and adults is the expectations. It's not the people.
Yeah, and yeah.
It isn't.
Yeah. Anyway, so I kind of took on the managing responsibilities of people, and so to me, it's just like my work children, that you try to help and make them grow and see their shortcomings and in the most gentle possible way help them get to the next level.
Right. So I'm kind of curious. I've kind of asked in a roundabout way some of the questions I usually ask other guests. I mean, obviously, I didn't ask you how you came to Angular because you've got the creator badge, so not worried about that one. But I am curious, like what parts of Angular, or what parts of the this whole evolution, the team, the community, what aspects of this are you the most proud of or excited about?
That's interesting. The reason it's kind of a hard question to answer is because when you go to store and you purchased an item, right? You're like, oh, it's perfect. That's what I want. When you build your item yourself, especially when like building a house or something, like when you like fix the door or something, like all the flaws. like, and they bug you to no end. Like
I'm
everybody else
sure.
walks by the door that you've installed, and you're like, oh, yeah, it's the door, good job. And then you're like, yeah, but that thing over there is off by 3 millimeters, and it's bugging me.
Yes, but I love the window in the door.
If I was to do it again, I would do it correctly, right? And then you do it again, and you're like, I got that one right, but now I got a different mistake.
Yep.
And so it never kind of ends. So when you ask me what I'm the most proud of, the part of the problem is that like I kind of see all the mistakes we have made, and I'm like, gee, I need to fix all these things, and it's
Right.
part of like what drives you through it, and be like, well, I see how this could have been done better. Like, can I go back and improve it so that basically I'm not embarrassed for what I've done.
Right. What's your favorite part of being the creator or founder or whatever of Angular?
I don't know. It feels mostly strange when you go to conferences and people like put you on pedestal, and they're embarrassed to talk to you or to they come
That
up.
I understand.
It's weird.
It
Like,
is super weird.
I'm
It's
just
like I go to Walmart and they just look at me like, credit card, right?
yeah. I went to a doctor. Kaiser's a local thing that we kind of a system we had here, and so I go to Kaiser the other day, and like there's this guy eyeing me. I'm like, okay, whatever. And then he comes up to me. He's like, "You're Misko, aren't you?" I was like, "Yeah." "Can I have a picture?" like I can't even go get my vaccines to not
Right.
running. So it's cute, but at the same time, it's like I'm really just a regular person. Like I live the same life as everybody else. I don't think very highly of me. It just so happens that a lot of people use what I do.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of people use what you do in many cases, right? It's just that you don't have the celebrity status, like people
Right.
who work on other aspects. So, if you worked on a car or you're engineering a car, and millions of people drive your car, right? And yet there is not this thing. So that part is definitely kind of weird. But it's fun, but it is kind of strange. And I would encourage people to just, treat us more humane, more like a regular people, right? And not be afraid to talk to us or ask questions or anything like that.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And the thing that I'm going to add, because I run into the same thing, right? Because you seized on the ideas that made Angular. I seized on the idea of talking about these things in panel discussion format, and so I'll go to a JavaScript conference or a Ruby conference, and I'll have people, I'll get an email after the conference, and it was like I was just too intimidated to come talk to you. And I'm just like, I'm just a guy, right? And I love talking to people and finding out where they come from and what drives them, and what it is that we do that really connects with them. And I see that a lot with the Angular core team, like at NGConf and some of these other conferences, you or Brad or some of these other folks, Rob, they get up and they speak, and, and it's like, I've encouraged people to go talk to them. So, go talk to you guys, because it's the same thing, right? I'm sure you want to hear from these folks.
Yep.
So, yeah. What are you all working on now, or what are you specifically working on now?
So currently I'm working on Ivy. Ivy is the new rendering engine that we're putting to Angular. We have high hopes for it. So just kind of set expectations. We have high hopes for it because it will make our lives easier, and it will make it awesome for you in a sense that we will be able to deliver some amazing features in the future.
Right.
But as of right now, Ivy is just same old Angular that you've always known. Nothing has changed.
Right.
And so I want to just make sure people don't expect that Ivy is going to land and the whole world is going to be amazing, right? No, Ivy is just an enabler that will make it so that in the future we can make a lot of different changes to the system. And the other thing we actually I'm excited about Ivy is that it will simplify things so that it will be easier for the open source community to come and contribute again. That's one of the things that I think we've kind of lost our way a little bit, and I wanted to fix that.
Good to hear. Yeah, and I think that's important. And I know a lot of people that contributed to AngularJS that have found it harder to contribute to Angular. So
yes.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. I guess the last question I have is just, how do people find you online? if they want to see what you're working on or reach out or anything? What do they do?
Well, GitHub is definitely to see what I'm working on. These days, a lot of what I do is more behind the scenes, talking to people, discussing ideas, writing specs. One of the things we'd like to do is we'd like to move the design spec process a little more external. So we're probably going to see more visibility to that in the future. I have a Twitter account, but I'm trying to cleanse my social stuff, so I try not to look at it.
Yeah. What's your handle on both of those?
It's Hevery is my handle just about everywhere.
Okay.
Like first name, initial, and then last name.
And if we catch you blogging, is that at blog.angular.io, or is that other places too?
I actually, the old blog I have is misko@hevery.com, but that's all testability stuff and hasn't been updated in 10 years.
Right.
I would like to actually start a new blog. I will probably go somewhere else, start a new medium or something, and kind of start discussing these ideas behind maybe Angular and behind how to grow as an individual and as a team. More than I don't want to continue the testing stuff. I think that's old news at this point. So I am planning of restarting that. Just how plans are.
Yeah, well, planning to for me is it may eventually happen because you get busy. You're trying to take care of other things, and very cool. Well, the last section of this show is picks. So do you have some picks for us?
Gosh, I should have prepared more. Let's see.
I feel like I ambush people with that sometimes.
I have a pick for you.
Yeah.
I've got a 3D printer recently.
I want one so bad.
Oh my gosh. I got a 3D printer, and for the longest time, I didn't want, so the printer I got is Prusa, by John Prusa. It's actually in Czech Republic. Yes, it's a country I come from, but it's just a coincidence.
Right.
It turns out it's really good, and I highly recommend it if you wanted to get into it. The thing I wanted to say is that I really thought, the reason it took me so long to get a 3D printer is because I was afraid that I was going to get a 3D printer, and I'm going to print 5 things, and it's just going to sit there. Right? And it was like a real fear of mine. Like, I'm going to get it, and I'm going to get all this slack from my wife saying, like, see, it's another toy, you got it. Not that she snags or anything like that, but like... And so I am happy to report that I had it now for like 3 months, and the thing is running nonstop.
Nice.
Luckily, it's quiet. But yes, highly recommend. That's my pick.
How much print space do you have? Like, what are the dimensions of the print area you have?
It's like about maybe foot by foot. It's not a big printer. Maybe a little
foot by a foot. Some of the ones I'm seeing. Just being out and about, you get like 4 inches by 4 inches by 6 inches or something. So
no, this is about a foot.
A foot by a foot by how high up will it print a foot?
Probably a little less than a foot. It's online. There's the exact dimensions. You could look it up, but it's reasonable sized.
Awesome. Can you put a link in the chat, and we'll make sure we get a link?
Sure.
Very cool. I'm jealous now. They just look really, really fun. And I'm constantly tinkering with stuff, and so that would just be something I could tinker with and something I could print parts of other stuff that I'm tinkering with.
So part of that is that you need to get into 3D design. And so when I don't code, my new hobby is to just play around with Fusion 360 and design whatever little random things around the house.
All right, cool. Well, I'm totally... Of course, my 13-year-old's homeschooled, so I'd be sitting in here and it'd probably be going all day and all night because he'd figure out how to play with it. I printed another Lloyd Garmadon from Lego Ninjago movie, Dad.
That's what my kids do.
You've got like 60 of those, son. Yeah, but this one... Anyway. I'm going to jump in here with a few picks. So, in fact, I'll just make it quick and I'll just do one. But I picked up, I was sick last week. I was really, really sick last week. And so, mostly I just wanted to lay around and not do anything. And I was in enough pain to where I really couldn't work. And so I picked up a series called the King Fountain series. It's by Jeff Wheeler. I listened to them on Audible. They're narrated by Kate Rudd, and they're pretty darn good. The main protagonist is this girl with magic powers. So anyway, terrific books. I really, really enjoyed them. If you've read his other books, there is a this one actually ties into another book series that he has. So that was fun. But yeah, just love those. So I'm going to pick those. And thanks for coming, Misko.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Well, we'll go ahead and wrap this one up, and we will catch everybody next week.
Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CACHEFLY.com to learn more.